In two news and views with myself, Salalo Makwidi. The time is 10 minutes past 8 Central African time, and we're going to be kickstarting the show with a very concerning 10 of events. If you just joined us, this is a story that has gripped the city, and rightly so. A few days ago, about 10 teenagers were found wandering barefoot and half naked in Malbert in Johannesburg, and a suspected human trafficking ring uncovered as a result. And with us now is Anti-Trafficking Investigator and Trainer Amy Arnold, who'll be joining us to give us a bit more insight on the story and just the state of human trafficking in South Africa and how you and I can protect ourselves. Amy, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to News and Views.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure's all ours. I think before we get into the main headline, we can kickstart the conversation with a bit of help for our listeners to understand the basics. What exactly is defined as human trafficking under South African law, and how does it differ from, let's say, smuggling or irregular migration in practice?
It's a very good question because the two are very closely related and there's a very fine line. So with trafficking, you have to have three elements. The acts, what is done. So were they recruited? Were they transported? Were they delivered? Were they sold? Okay, the means, how it is done. Were they kidnapped? Were they forced? Was somebody given money for them? Were they threat of harm? That sort of thing. And the third is the purpose, which the purpose is always exploitation. But what kind of exploitation? So was it for sex? Was it for labor? Is it debt bondage? Is it for pornography? Etc. So those three elements have to be met for trafficking. Now with children, that middle section, the means, does not have to be present. Okay, so you just need to prove the acts and the purpose. Smuggling, there's three main differences between trafficking and smuggling. Smuggling has to cross the national border, right? And trafficking doesn't. I've seen people traffic their own children in their own homes every day. Okay, also, trafficking has a third party that benefits, the exploitation part. Smuggling may not have that exploitation, actually does not have that exploitation part. And then there's consent. You know, smuggling can happen willingly and trafficking cannot happen willingly. And the main difference is that exploitation part, because I can agree to go across the border. I could pay you 10,000 Rand and hop in your boat. We get across the border, we shake hands and split ways, albeit it was illegal, but it's not trafficking, okay? But once I am then used for some sort of exploitation, that's when it crosses the line.
Let's jump into this specific case. The reports that we're getting, where there was reportedly 10 boys unable to communicate in English. They were found wandering naked or half naked in broad daylight. What do we know from this, and what are the immediate indicators that law enforcement used to identify that this was a trafficking situation?
Well, first of all, it was a joint effort by, I believe, security and police and Hawks. So super well done to them for doing that, and for whoever noticed it. You know, sometimes we live our lives with these blinders on, and I'm just really glad that someone in the community decided to actually report it. The half naked part, I mean, that's obviously disturbing, right? And you see that draws our attention. Actually, that is very common lately with smuggling people and then stripping them down so they can't escape. And then what the people are doing often is asking for ransom for these people. I'm not saying that's what happened, because we just don't know all the details yet, but we also, the information that's been released to the public does not exactly define trafficking yet either. So we have to wait for those elements to be proven. I believe the first court appearance is today, so maybe we'll find out more. But we haven't seen anybody talk about exploitation yet, so we don't know if it's trafficking. And so far, the fact that they're foreigners, they're found half naked, that's kind of the MO of some smuggling trends that we've seen lately.
And I think that's the most concerning part. What factors do you think, makes children and teenagers, especially foreign nationals here in South Africa, particularly susceptible to trafficking networks? And are there any mitigating factors?
Yeah, so they're among the most vulnerable groups. So when you talk about trafficking, people are lured in for the false promises of three things: it's employment, education, and relationship. Okay, and you have different vulnerable groups, and children are vulnerable just by nature, right? They're
Mm,
just they're a vulnerable group. Foreign nationals or immigrants or migrants, they're another vulnerable group. So right now, this group we're looking at has appeared to tick both those boxes. You also have people with adverse childhood experiences, drug addicts. You have these different vulnerable groups, and what's happening now, as technology is worldwide and everyone is online doing things, is we got these emotional vulnerabilities that we see in people too. So to exploit somebody, you have to know their vulnerability.
mm,
So in this case, it looks like the foreign national, maybe their children. There's some physical vulnerabilities, but what we're seeing a whole lot more of these days in grooming and online trafficking and online grooming is the emotional vulnerabilities are being used.
Emotional vulnerabilities. What exactly would that be in real life context?
Yeah. So say someone's on, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, TikTok, complaining about how they lost their job or they're in a divorce or their parents are going through divorce. They're lonely, right? These online groomers are going after the lonely. They're befriending
Mm,
them. That's part of the grooming stage. They're building that trust. And then and grooming takes time. It takes time. No one gets groomed overnight and gets thrown into a van and they're trafficked. Okay. It's a relationship. So by the time it happens, the abuse happens or the exploitation happens, they feel like they're friends with this person or they feel like it's their boyfriend. It could take a year easily. So that's the emotional vulnerabilities. And quite honestly, in some parts of the world and in some cases, it's easier because someone can sit behind a computer and groom 100
mm,
people at once. And
mm.
that's more time efficient for them than physically doing it. But of course, we're still seeing, the trafficking face to face for sure.
Mm, mm, mm. We're hearing that the suspect of this alleged trafficking network is a foreign national himself, and he faces charges of human trafficking and illegal immigration. What kind of challenges and you know shortcomings do authorities face when it comes to prosecuting trafficking cases like this one, especially when victims are minors and may not speak local languages?
So obviously, you're going to have this translation issue. Um, Fortunately, in this country, there are lots of people that speak lots of languages, but
Mm,
that is often a hurdle to get because you want an interpreter for different people. You don't want the same interpreter questioning the suspect and then interviewing the victims. Okay, for some bias
mm,
reasons. So that will be a challenge. Also, just there hasn't been as many trafficking cases, let's say, as there is people just sending people back home for legal immigration. Okay,
mm,
it seems like that's the easier route, and so the challenge is going to be having uh, the right law enforcement, the right government officials all along the chain to actually do a trafficking case and have the resources for that. I've often seen them just, um, in my opinion, probably could lack of education and lack of resources, just send them back for immigration. And that's
mm,
the challenge. We often hear these headlines: trafficking suspects, 80 people found in a house, these 10 kids found in CBD. But do we follow the case in a couple of years to know if the case is
mm.
still going on? Or what have they done? Have they just sent them home? Was it a trafficking case or did they decide it was something else? So unfortunately, the splash headlines we get sometimes are not the same as the end result. And I think it's important to follow that all the way through.
Mm, mm. Amy, I think what's concerning for me is for a very long time now we've seen these kind of cases make the headlines, especially in the last 2 years. They've been making the headlines almost every week. What is it about South Africa that makes it, should I say, destination of choice for human trafficking rings?
So You guys are South Africa is a source country, it's a destination country, and it's also a transit country. Okay, you have the first and third largest airports on the continent. You touch 6 countries, 2 oceans. You got ports, you just got borders everywhere, ports everywhere. So a lot of opportunity to come in. But the number one reason that trafficking flourishes in any country is it's an organized crime, and you cannot have organized crime without corruption and complicit
Mm,
officials. So unfortunately, we have a major challenge with accountability and the systems in place. South Africa has fantastic laws, and in every government department, there are fantastic people. Okay, Unchain Our Children, we have a great partnership with DSD, and we get to work with them, but it's not countrywide, and it's not the majority of people, unfortunately. So as long as the corruption and the unaccountability exist, people from all over the world are still gonna try to come to South Africa or go through South Africa. A lot of people,
mm,
traffickers know they want some good fake documents, run their people through South Africa, actually, and they can get them out. But we're
mm,
also seen as, Johannesburg is still the city of gold, right? So that's a lie that gets people down here, whether smuggling or trafficking or both. That's we're still a good place to be, especially for the rest of Africa. People are still trying to think South Africa is the quote unquote promised land, the city of
mm.
gold. There's lots of jobs. Let's go there, and that's a lie.
No, most definitely. Amy, schools are about to reopen. The holidays have come to an end. A lot of parents are going to be letting go of their children to go
Mhm.
back to school, to go back to daycare. How do you protect your kids? How do you protect, as you mentioned, the most vulnerable in our society from being trafficked, from being kidnapped, and all kinds of things happening to them?
Yeah, I believe you should talk to them at a very early age. And there's different ways at the Unchain Our Children website. We've even got a flyer that talks about how to talk to your kids, primary age school kids, even and high schoolers, about how to talk to them about this. But this idea of, and I'm not saying, I mean, kidnapping happens, right? And people are grabbed off the streets. But when it comes to them being trafficked, that's less than 4% worldwide of cases are done like that. It's the online platforms. That's what I warn parents about. I warn parents about, um, people trusting too much, people that they may not know or just met, or that grooming process. When we go into schools and have school talks and parent talks, I really talk about grooming and online safety as a very top priority.
No, most definitely. Amy, thank you so much for joining us and giving us an insight to that very, very concerning turn of events. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you so much.
That was yeah, man. When you just think about it, especially with schools now about to open and parents, some for the first time in the next week having to let go of their kids, and then you see stories like this, and you hear from Amy about just how prevalent human trafficking is in South Africa. It becomes a very, very concerning turn of events, a very, very concerning environment that we're living in. And I want to hear from you. How do you begin the conversation with your kids about protecting themselves, and what mitigating factors if you put in, to make sure that in the event something like this does happen, your kids are aware and they know how to avoid situations where they could be kidnapped, they could potentially and unfortunately be trafficked. How do you do it, especially with schools opening now? What do you tell your kids? What do you do? You can engage with us on our studio line. That's 0116800355, or you can send us a WhatsApp voice note on 0617666035. How do you protect yourself and, most importantly, your children from the prevalence of human trafficking? You heard from Amy. South Africa has a very entrenched human trafficking culture, should I say. It's a destination of choice, it's a destination of transit where people are smuggled from countries from all across the world, particularly from the African continent, and ultimately they get transitioned, get fake documents in South Africa because of our corrupt systems that we all know about, and they are shipped to God knows where. So, how do you begin having that conversation? Number one, and what mitigating steps or factors have you put in place to protect your kids, most importantly, from being kidnapped and being smuggled out of the country. Again, our studio line is 0116800355, and you can send us a voice note or a text on 061 766 0355. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Catherine Constantinidis. She's a humanitarian, human rights activist, and she was recently in Venezuela, and we'll be exploring what she saw weeks leading up to Maduro's kidnapping and ultimate persecution in the United States of America, and those conversations bubbling up before it actually happened. What were things looking like in Venezuela? And at this current moment, what is the sentiment across the country regarding this? It's going to be a really, really interesting one. Hope you stay with us to catch it right after this short break.